Welcome to this episode of the Homestead Journey Podcast 5-Minute Fridays, your weekly dose of information, inspiration, and motivation. Now, here's your host, Brian Wells.
Thank you, Bonnie, and welcome everyone to another episode of 5-Minute Fridays. On today's episode, we are going to talk about 5 of the most useful and versatile items that I have here on the homestead. Now, certainly this is not a comprehensive list of all things useful and versatile. And so what I am asking you to do is to collaborate with me. I would love to hear from you what you find useful and versatile on your homestead that did not make my list. So certainly reach out to me, brian@thehomesteadjourney.net, and I will be following this episode up with the items that listeners to this podcast find very versatile and useful on their homestead. So send me an email with the item or items and your name and your homestead, and that way I can give you a shout out here on the podcast. All right, so let's jump right into it. This is not in any particular order, but starting off, number 1 on the list is cattle panels. Now, I use cattle panels for a lot of things. I use them in the garden for trellising. I have them arched over to kind of create a tunnel. And then I also attach them to T-posts to grow things like sugar snap peas, English peas. I even use them to trellis my tomatoes and runner beans. I've used cattle panels to make different kinds of animal shelters. I have several different types of mobile chicken coops and chicken tractors made from cattle panels. And I also have a summer shelter that I use with my pigs that is made out of some arched cattle panels between a couple of T-posts. So cattle panels are something that are extremely versatile. And of course, they can be used for their intended purposes. Cattle panels and hog panels to actually create fencing. Very, very versatile, and definitely something that it is well worth investing the money into to have them on your homestead. Number 2 on the list are zip ties. Now, I use zip ties for a lot of different things. I use zip ties to secure the tarp to the cattle panels for the temporary summer shelter for my pigs. But I also use zip ties to sometimes keep gates open, sometimes to keep gates closed as a temporary measure to hold fencing up on T-posts. I even use zip ties to secure my poultry shrink bags when we are processing poultry. Zip ties, in my opinion, are God's gift to homesteaders. Number 3, it's something that might get discarded, but I love having it around, and that is baling twine. Now, if you followed me on Instagram and Facebook for any length of time, you will see that I use baling twine in the garden to mark out my square foot garden beds. I also utilize baling twine to sometimes hold open gates, sometimes to hold gates closed, sometimes to secure fencing. I've even used baling twine to hold up my britches when I've forgotten a belt. I love having baling twine around on the homestead, and I find it extremely useful. Number 4, 5-gallon buckets. Now, 5-gallon buckets are something that I don't think you can ever have enough of. You can do so many things with them, from fermentation projects to using them to haul feed and water to your animals, using them to gather produce. I've actually used them to create a sprouting system to feed my animals. You can use them to create kill cones. And then obviously, if you're butchering chickens, use them to catch the guts and the blood. And there's just so many different things that you can do with 5-gallon buckets. One of those things that I just don't think you can ever quite have enough of them on the homestead. And then finally, pallets. I have made a number of different styles of animal shelters out of pallets. I have made planters out of pallets, compost bins, several different styles of compost bins using pallets. There's 1,001 ways to reuse pallets on your homestead. And if you don't believe me, head on over to Pinterest and look for it. You'll find pallets used in ways that you can't even imagine. So my 5 most useful and versatile items on the homestead: cattle panels, zip ties, baling twine, 5-gallon buckets, and pallets. What did I miss? Let me know. And like I said, I will include your name in Homestead as a shout out as we continue talking about useful and versatile items on the homestead. This week's journey quote of the week is, believe me, my journey has not been a simple journey of progress. There have been many ups and downs, and it is the choices that I made at each of those times that have helped shape what I have achieved. And that is from Satya Nadella. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I will catch you next week here on 5 Minute Fridays.
Brian can be reached by emailing him at brian@thehomesteadjourney.net or by contacting him via our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support this podcast, we invite you to become a member of the Supporting Listeners program. For $10 a month or $100 per year, you will receive access to a community of like-minded individuals via a private Facebook group, at least one monthly live Q&A with Brian, the opportunity to participate in live recordings of the podcast, access to an ever-expanding library of helpful homesteading content, and so much more. Head on over to support.thehomesteadjourney.net for more information and to sign up today. As always, the music on this episode was provided by audionautics.com, so a big shout out to them.
And until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.